Hey everyone, welcome. It's good to have you joining us here today. I'm Alex Slosby, Chief Growth Officer here at InnoLead, and I'm excited to have you join our webcast, Building the Business Case While Designing the Product, with my friend Toby Bottorf, Whitespace Innovation Lead and Head of Client Engagement and Innovation from EPAM Continuum. Good to have you.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everybody.
We'll get started in just a minute, but while everybody's settling in, please do share in the chat where you're connecting in from. Toby, I think we're not too far away. I'm just in the Boston suburbs. Are you at the Continuum office or elsewhere?
No, my shirt gives it away. I'm on site at a client in Orlando today.
Oh, wow. Nice. The weather up here isn't too bad, but hopefully it's nice and sunny and warm in Orlando.
Ciao, Milano.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. Thank you all for joining. Great to see, as always, where folks are coming in from and a lot of good friends that join us. Our friend Scott from Brookline, excellent. Yeah, Megan's up in Buffalo. Wonderful. Dana from Toronto, fantastic. Great to be able to great to be able to connect the world through all of these excellent topics. So excited to have you all coming in with us today. We'll get started in just a moment. Toby, how is the weather in Orlando? Nice, hopefully?
Hot, high 80s.
Wow. That actually doesn't sound terrible.
No, it's pretty strange.
Wonderful, everybody. Thanks again. We'll get started. We've got a lot of good things to cover and want to make sure that Toby's got some great time to go through a bunch of great slides, a bunch of great thoughts, and that we can take your questions and your thoughts as we go. So as we get started, as is customary, today's webcast is being recorded, so we will have the replay and also Toby's slides available, and we'll be in touch with you about that down the road just a little bit. We will take questions as we go, so please take advantage of the Zoom chat to share questions and comments. Please feel free to use the Zoom Q&A feature as well, and we'll be monitoring it, and we'll take some as we go, and then we will make sure to have some time at the end. So once again, everybody, welcome to our webcast, Building the Business Case While Designing the Product, with Toby from Continuum. Toby is a designer and strategist who leads Continuum's Whitespace innovation offering, which identifies new market opportunities and launches new products and services that deliver growth. He also leads the client engagement team for innovation consulting. And then a quick note, some of the relevant work that he'll talk about today includes a data and regulatory compliance platform to help companies set and meet sustainability goals, the development of practice transition product for the American Dental Association, the initial concept and launch of Audi On Demand, very cool, and thought leadership on the future of distributed healthcare, care closer to home. So without further ado, very excited to have you. Toby, the floor is yours.
Cool, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for putting into the chat where you're coming in from. Hi, Brian. I haven't seen you in ages. I'm sure there's lots of other folks that I didn't quite catch the flow of greetings, but really glad to be here. Really glad to be able to share some lessons learned, including some lessons learned maybe painfully. But I want to start by understanding where you guys are coming from. So we'll launch a little poll to just get a sense of your area of greatest expertise. Are you a designer? Are you an MBA? Are you a technologist? You might be more than one of those, but choose the area where you feel is your area of confident expertise. I'm coming from the design quadrant. I'm curious if I'm speaking to folks like me or folks in the other corners. Okay, good representation in business. So maybe I'll try to think about the script as designing the product while building the business case. I have seen cases where a business case is built out for a hypothetical product that doesn't exist yet. And the challenge there is making sure you're building something that people actually want. Oftentimes with leaning too strongly into designing the product, you have something that you think people really, really love, but you don't know how many of them there are. So doing both together is really, really crucial. So I'm going to start kind of where I think about starting in my work all the time, which is that innovation is always the work that we do with incomplete information. And I guess we enjoy the uncertainty that brings, that it's a little bit exciting. But we are in an environment where failure is always prowling, lurking, trying to take us down. High failure rates are expected to be tolerated. Learning from failure is something that organizations try to do. And in that context, what I'm really, really hungry for is more information and more sources of information to get a path to clarity and confident decisions. And concentrating on the business case is another lens to look at the problem space. So that's kind of where I start with, that it's another way to build sort of a complementary source of information. So why do this? Just to make sure that it's really crucial. We are essentially trying to validate the demand in a couple of ways to provide the rationale with a couple of artifacts to invest in future growth. And that investment in future growth is probably not the thing we're doing right now. Every investment in the front end of innovation is an investment in a bigger project downstream. At best, it's a down payment for something bigger to come. The cost of building is higher than the cost of speculating and framing. Or at a minimum, if the idea doesn't see it through to market, it's an investment in learning, or it's an insurance against building the wrong thing. Sometimes when we quantify the value of our work, we should make sure we're getting credit for the things that we did not spend millions of dollars building because there was no proven market demand for. So when you think about the next bigger investment, that is the CFO is your client, or the board if it's a small organization, or investors if you are in the market space and you are really looking at a panel of organizational or individual or angel investors. So this is kind of why this is crucial. And I like to think about it in terms of the confidence for that CFO to make decisions, to approve something to go forward. We're not trying to talk them into something we think is a bad idea. We apply that same rigor to our own judgment, but there's a lot of different reasons, often showing up at the same time, for why somebody chooses to pursue or kill an early idea. One is the emotional pull. If they're close to the customer research and the ideation work, that design work, they might fall in love with the idea. We run the risk of doing that all the time. The other is sort of a security or absence of insecurity. They believe in the process. They have confidence in you, in your confidence, your conviction in the idea. And there's sort of a bet your job courage. We look for that in clients. We try to stimulate that in clients because it is a little bit risky. We are working with incomplete information. And then I think the third basis for decision-making is just the mathematics. This will get us to X, it will cost us Y. It's a good idea to know what the baseline requirement is for something that, some organizations say, if this isn't 50 million a year, we're not going to do it. If this isn't 100 million a year, we're not going to do it. 500 million, whatever it is. If we know what much later downstream is going to be the basis for this thing, scaling into the business, we can plan for that in the very early going. So the business case is more though than just the financials. In a way, that title slide that had while in an area of overlap is the most important part of this story. That word while, not just are you doing these things, but how are you doing them together? How do they reinforce each other? And how do we find operational alignment? So when you think about the customer, I mentioned the CFO or the CEO. When I think about viability, I'm also looking at the idea of operational alignment. That it's not a universal or a generic question. It's not, can this work as a business? It's, can we pull this off? And that's influenced by how much do we want to pull this off? How well does this align with the other priorities that the organization has? Or if this is going into the business to a business leader, who will thank you for this? Who's going to want it? So I asked where people were coming from in their area of expertise. One of the things I'm curious about to launch a second poll here is, what are the challenges? I think there's a bunch of different operational alignment challenges that we run into in this work. I'll give you time to read these because these are just an example of all of the breakdowns that we've seen in doing this work.
Take another few seconds on it. Keep it coming in, about 25%. We're building up. Excellent. Final few seconds. Excellent. I think we are good. If you want to share the results, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
There's that ROI one.
Yeah, proving ROI. So I think I mentioned this already, but one way to demonstrate ROI is to take credit for if somebody comes to you with a really strong hypothesis and they want to get started on building something and checking the viability the desirability of it in the market means that you don't end up doing it. Take credit for the savings. That's the first ROI, is that we didn't build something that we were then going to have to spend $1 million driving engagement to it because the value prop was not intrinsic to the product. So yeah, ROI and stalling out an MVP. That's very familiar to me. I think that is a point where it's kind of been fun in a playing with house money way, and then the stakes go up. And suddenly that incomplete information, we don't know what's going to happen when we put this in front of real customers, is pretty terrifying. So I've been in situations where, you know, we validate once more, and then we validate once more, and then we run a survey to validate once more, because putting it in front of customers involves some reputational risk. So all of those different challenges for me, I think, speak to different points of obscurity, lack of visibility into kind of the operational flow of an idea on its way to the market. You want to know where things are going. Are they flowing back into the business? Are they being spun out as separate things? Are you going to try to sell them? Do you have a product office that sits between IT and the business? I think about IT and business primarily because we're in a primarily digital space, but you know, operations include staff if this is more of a service design type project. And the reason why you have to understand your buyer as your customer, not just the end user, is I think really great ideas, you know, the ideas that we can fall in love with are like beautiful purebred puppies. You might love them, but if you have a litter of 8 or 9 of them, selling them is not guaranteed to be easy. So you don't want to be in this situation where one of these is actually my dog. That's why I love this picture so much. I don't know which one, but you know, a puppy, especially in Boston, especially for a French bulldog, can go for $4,000. But a lot of them are abandoned, and that's because the value of an idea depends on its appeal to a buyer. And sometimes there's only one buyer, and they're in your organization. And if they don't want your idea, it can be really hard to figure out where it's going. So I think the lesson that I've learned from this is, even though I start from the perspective of desirability, I behave in projects like I'm in a B2B to C model. And that first B2B is for an internal investor, buyer, operator. Everybody who's doing innovation inside of a large organization might be running the risk of bypassing their internal buyer / partner and just behaving a little bit too direct to consumer. Curious to hear some thoughts on that. So that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and everybody continue to share questions and comments with us. I'll just say it's such an important point. You know, Toby, as we've talked about, I mean, this is sales. You try to change things, do something new, and you got to convince people, particularly those who may not benefit from the change, to get on board, right? And so, you know, who's your customer? And we've written about this as well. Quite often, your internal customer matters more than your external customers. If you can't sell them, you won't have a chance to get to market. So, couldn't agree more. And yeah, folks continue to put comments and questions in the chat and Q&A.
So there's an adjustment I want to make to this probably very familiar feasibility, desirability, viability model. I put it in the very first poll. I think it's a starting point and a sort of a reference base level for all of us here. Let me know if not. But the breakdowns, the challenges that were in that poll, some of the breakdowns that we see recurring again and again are this. I think the way to factor that is to zoom out a little bit and think about a fourth dimension, which is priority. And I think it's very much the same as desirability, except it's for an internal audience. It's your buyer who may not be the same as your user in a B to B2C model. And solving for it can leverage a lot of the same tools, methods, and mindsets that we apply to understanding desirability. Well, what are people trying to get done? When we are working on projects that are about ultimately employee experience or productivity of staff, we think about people's jobs and the future of work and kind of isolate the craft and the stuff. I prefer a little bit more of a craft versus crap, has a better sound to it, but how are we making sure that what we're contributing to people adds to their craft, their sense of mastery in their work, has emotional appeal to them in their jobs, and it's not adding a whole lot of stuff to their work. Like, I have a full-time job, why would I want to add this? The benefits have to outweigh the costs for folks. So if we're trying to factor in priority more and see the world through the eyes of our buyers, not just our end user customers, it helps to kind of go back to thinking about evidence and data, about quant and qual as measures that get used together. And that's really the most of what I want to talk about for the rest of the way here, is that while intersection. How are business thinking and design thinking working well together at different stages? I think of quant as helping with a lot of the sort of divergent convergent thinking. So in opportunity identification, we often have the problem of, like, how do we not boil the ocean? And we do some desk research, read some purchase reports, try to understand where the market potential is, where the activity of startups is. And then on convergence at that first opportunity identification phase, helps tease apart the differences between things that a small number of people love and things that can make money. They're not necessarily the same thing. In designing a product and designing the business case together, one of the things we usually have to figure out is, where do people pay? What are they getting for free? Does that model make sense to them? Do we put the cost in a different place? There's a relationship between the things that people provide or get for free and the things that they charge for. And we have to anchor the thing they're paying for to the point of maximum value for them if we can. And I think the quant studies help with that. In particular, if we found something that's really desirable, do we know that they represent a market? Is it true for a lot of other people? So I think of quant as helping us get through that first gate, but some of the second gate and third gate challenges. Does our concept meet the market? And can we test at a conceptual level? That's, I think of design as going from sketchy to really, really high fidelity. I think of market assessments doing the same thing. So can we test conceptually? Can we sketch out the market position of something conceptually, and then at a higher fidelity, think about how does it make money? So I've got a couple of examples of what that might look like from a project. We were looking at a very rapidly emerging space, which meant very, very uncertain environment, a lot of mixed signals, a lot of anticipated adoption. This was not autonomous cars, but it's probably a similar environment. Like, they're going to be ubiquitous. Don't make me answer when. So, we saw that there was a short time horizon. This is based on survey results we did with, an N in the hundreds of people, our survey respondents, and we backed this up, compared this to other analysts' reports. People were expecting things to change very much in the short horizon. People told us they were already paying for a solution. So they were actively working in this space. The interesting thing was what happened when we showed them our concept of our product. They said, oh, I guess I'm not paying for a solution. I guess I'm cobbling something together. So we recognized we had a really competitive position, and that they were basically operating in the space of workarounds, rather than feeling like that there was an ideal solution that even existed for them yet. And then in the second example, a project that was looking at price sensitivity, kind of where customer demand meets revenue potential. We had a model in the big pale blue dots that we put in front of people, and it was a tiered model based on the size of the organization for a subscription product. What we saw in individual interviews, so this is extracted from a very small n. Each vertical column is an individual respondent, but we believed, because it was backed up by a bigger survey, that the main takeaways were valid, that the trend line was that people at the bottom of the market, small companies, and we've heard this on other projects, they're comparing to something that's free. That is the way small businesses tend to operate. What's good enough that I don't have to pay any money for? We were under representing the demand in an enterprise market. So this led us to, based on this product and what we know about what people are willing to pay for it, that we should not try to serve small customers. It will be hard to give them something that they consider valuable. And there are a lot of them, so they could generate a high cost to serve in terms of, if everybody has one customer complaint, there's just a lot of them coming in. Enterprise clients, a smaller number of them can be served in a deeper way. We changed the price gradient and thought about it with clarity about the market. Move a little bit up market, and we can charge more than we thought we could charge. So to zoom back out to that sort of diamonds and pearls slide, that divergent convergent slide, there are a couple of gates and phases that we can consider. This first one is really experience design led, focused on desirability, and it has market defined acceptance criteria, starting with, is this something that people want? Does it make sense in terms of a differentiated brand, et cetera? And you can see business viability comes very late in the game, problematic, I think. So what's a way to think about these gates in a more business way? Certainly one of them is to go through them with a business lens and think of them primarily as managing risk and managing cost. Ultimately, this is about prototyping at the lowest fidelity possible to get the answer you need, i.e. managing costs effectively, not building out something really expensive, really high fidelity to prove the first pass of customer desirability, but doing that in the sketchiest way possible to give you the confidence you need. But beyond managing that risk and sort of de-risking the process, there's another way of thinking about it, which is focused primarily on business. And that is the business alignment, the business operations alignment, or the strategic alignment, the financial modeling, and the capability to deliver. And there are different gates that you can map to the way you're sketching out concept design, detail design around the opportunity to definition, validating the solution, and then activating the solution. And what we've been able to do on a couple of projects is bring these things together and sort of get it out of abstract and into much more straightforward language. Are we solving the right problem? And we can ask that in market-facing ways and in customer-facing ways. Have we defined that problem well and embodied the solution in the right way? And then are we well situated in the market? I think one of the things that people mentioned in the first poll is MVP is a place where things can stall out. When we are defining the market, when we are talking to customers, one of the bridges, I think, is to identify the super users who might be the early adopters as a beachhead for the market. Can we identify who we're going to first? Can we get a high market win rate really strongly penetrate a well-defined niche of the market and branch out rather than get like 3% of the total market, but it's 3% of everybody. Go in with a sharper proposition for a more tightly defined customer. So that means helps get from embodying the right solution for the right buyer to lead you to what it means to be situated in the market in the first year, and treat your early customers as a proving ground. It's another prototyping medium. You put it out in the market, and then you really get to learn what's going on as a path to the more mature market size. So I'm going to switch up a little bit and jump into some tools that we use at various stages in the process. Because what we're trying to get at here is, again, the word while, what we're trying to get at is product market fit. So the more we can have tools that compare our understanding of the product and the product experience to our understanding of the market, the price sensitivity, the size of the market, how to define it, how to get after it from a marketing and go-to-market strategy, the better we'll be. So these are things we have used on projects, and yes, we'll absolutely share these slides. And these are sort of, I think of a lot of these things as sort of placemats. It's a one snapshot view. It starts out fairly generic, but it digs into some of the particulars in your case. The idea that what you're looking at developing or leveraging existing technologies, again, for a digital thing, what are the baseline capabilities? That is, what's the minimum viable product, the minimum desirable product, below which you're not even at a baseline that's competitive in the market? What do you have to do? What do you have to build to get a notable bit of attention that you've got something differentiated? And then at the topmost level, how do you get to something disruptive? And is the proof of that disruption so important to you that you should bake in a version of that into the minimum lovable product? I think of an MVP as the test of the most crucial hypotheses, the bet your job hypotheses. If this is not true, we should go home now. Those are the things that you want to bake into your MVP, your minimum lovable product. And then this is an example taken from a project. If it's too small to read, that'll help keep it relatively anonymous. If you can read it, it still doesn't give away anything too much. But understanding how business and technology, this is in the area of overlap between business and technology. What is how do we define the benefits of this to internal and external audiences? This skews internal, but can we map it to performance indicators, and how those things will manifest? I think if for folks that are trying to show ROI better, everything that's in the outer ring here is something that you would want to be able to track as a result of the work that we're doing. These are the kinds of things, and this speaks to a specific financial services client. These would be different in the outer ring. They're a little bit more generic or universal in the inner ring, but you should think about, in your own situation, what are the things that maybe your entire portfolio has a common inner ring that's different from this one, and everything in that secondary ring is custom to a specific project in that portfolio or product in that portfolio. And then the last one is this J curve. We talk a lot about S curves and helping clients find new S curves, but S curves are only S curves if we're not counting costs. And my CFO wants to know the cost. So I make sure when we're putting together the business case that we are answering three really important questions. The area above the curve in one is equal to the area below the curve in one. That's the sunk cost and the recouped cost. What are the investments required? And how long until we are first at that break-even point, operationally, like, okay, we're making money now. At the end of that second one space, we've recouped our initial cost. And then how big does this ultimately get? If it's going to tend to flatten out as all of these curves do, what is the height that it reaches when it reaches that point?
Hey, Toby, a quick question on this. So we know that CFOs frequently ask for points of precision. How many dollars will it take? How much will it generate? Give us it, to a bunch of precision points out for several years. And we know with Whitespace innovation projects, there's a lot of it you just don't know. You may have assumptions. So how do you tackle that when there's desire to get very precise about these things, but the teams driving these innovation projects, it's a bunch of finger in the air stuff. So how do you kind of handle that intersection?
That's a really great question. I could get pretty animated about that. I just read a book recently called Radical Uncertainty, that is about a bunch of things that are like that idea of precision is not the same as accuracy. I treat it as like one of those mental rocks in my shoe. Like it's just bugs me on a daily basis. Because precision and accuracy are not the same thing. I've got a slide a little bit coming up that goes into that. But like, just as an example, when we report on political polls, we usually say somebody is looking at like 49.1% of the vote. And that means that somebody else has whatever, 50.9 or whatever, but they're doing it to a decimal point. And then they tell you that the margin of error is 4%. So they are giving you 40 times more precision than is accurate. It's crazy. And there's comfort in the precision because it feels like accuracy. I think it's our job to a CFO to present a range. And I have the upcoming slide is about, like Ralph says in the chat, product launch will be in week 36, 2 years from now. Or total product revenue will be 126 million. I would say up to 126 million. That book Radical Uncertainty talks about, it opens with the scenario of Obama's decision to go into take out Osama bin Laden, and the intel that he got from very, very expert people on whether Osama bin Laden was even in that location. And some people said, I can tell you with a great degree of confidence that he's there, somewhere between 20 and 60%. Somebody else said between 50 and 70%. It's useless information at that point. So where does confidence come from in that environment? The book has a lot of other great examples, like how nobody actually anticipated the 2008 crash. But it comes from mistaking risk and uncertainty, mistaking precision and accuracy. Thank you for letting me vent a little bit.
Love it, love it.
So I'm going to jump into a couple of case studies. That example of quantitative measures will come up in a second, but I want to introduce them as sort of ways of thinking about how to start. Getting started can be the hardest part. A friend of mine in college went to Japan and played a game of Go against his host and was told after his first move, don't do that, you will lose. Getting it wrong at the very first move can be fatal, can be a non-recoverable thing. So how to get started is a place that makes my palms sweaty, for sure. Making sure we set out in the right way. So I think there are two strategies that I've seen, and I've got a case study from each one. They're both B2B cases, but basically the first one is to go exploring. And that is true Whitespace, true blue ocean innovation. The challenge here is that the problem space may not be tightly defined enough. You could explore forever. You could do absolutely anything. So you're only going to do one thing. What is that thing that you're going to do? It's the ultimate convergent activity, and it might be too much to handle. In the second case, what you're trying to do is place a bet. I would bet hard if I had a king and an ace in the hole, or not showing. That doesn't come up very often, but oftentimes this is a starting point where we have a hypothesis, or the client engages us with a hypothesis, and our first thing is to validate it or disprove it. Really important distinction there, that validate has a little bit of bias to it. Tell me this is true. Before I proceed any further, there's often a desire in that to come back with a positive answer. And it's hard to avoid. There's two kind of opposite problems with these ways of framing up the challenge. One, in this case, when you're placing a bet, the real thing you have to fight is confirmation bias or overconfidence. A validation wants to come back with a right answer, and oftentimes clients will tell us, it would be great if this was the answer, because operationally we can really pull this off really well. It's easy for us to do this part well. The other challenge in this space is that you have to make sure you're not framing up the customer test or the market test as a simple yes, no, or if the answer is no, you're done. How do you make sure you leave enough exploration space to pivot, to say it's not this, but what people told us is actually better? The opposite problem, if we are exploring, is you have to solve for arbitrariness. When you could be doing anything, what are you going to do? And you always have to answer the question, as opposed to what? Why this and not something else? So when you're going exploring, it's really helpful, I think, to have multiple options and let them kind of compete with each other and keep each other honest. Because if you're just looking at one in isolation, you will find it hard to fight that charge that, like, this is an arbitrary choice. It could have been anything. So that's what we're trying to get at. So jumping into the particulars of these two cases, the first one is this sustainability solution. We define the opportunity pretty broadly. This opportunity statement helped to tell us a lot about who the buyer was, the essential value of the product, the maturity of it, like what is the initial value for a minimum level product, what's the broader value as we get ahead and expand into the market, and a little bit about the roadmap. Trying to do the same thing in terms of value for customers. We understood what the value proposition was for them and who they are by industry and by jurisdiction. We chose a certain geography to enter the market in. We wanted to see the world from their perspective. So if they are cobbling together solutions and we show them our product and they say, oh, this is actually a thing, those weren't. What are those existing alternatives? Not just as offerings that the ultimate user is going to choose between, but for us, what is our position competitively in the market relative to other players? Are we going to look to partner with some other startups? Are we going to look to outpace the enterprise companies? Are we going to look for them to acquire this and roll it into their ERP systems? Those were all business decisions that we evaluated. And who are the customer segments? And then finally, thinking about it as evidence of customer value, market potential, and alignment with internal strategy. So the thing I want to highlight here is in terms of the market sizing, from an initial market to a mature market. Again, this was a very volatile space. It's an area where predictions about the future are really likely to be wrong because things are changing so quickly. But we saw that turbulence was at the heart of the value that people were looking for. They were looking for some stability, some predictability, and our product would help them with that. So this is where I mentioned the radical uncertainty and the difference between precision and accuracy. When we were looking at the size of the market for this, we had two really crucial ways of sizing the market. One was, how big is the market going to be? The category adoption is that the market is going to be somewhere, between bottom left and top left. And the axis reading left to right is what can we imagine our share to be in this space? And we saw that we have much more ability to control one of these than the other. We have very little ability to control the category adoption. We can, given the timing, be more aggressive on what we think our share might be. So if you are being asked for precision, I like coming back with a multiple set of numbers and being able to argue about which is the one you should choose. Is the one middle right, which is the one we went with, the right one? We believe that we can be optimistic about our market share. We have no reason to be optimistic about the potential for the overall category. And I think of this, I'm going to make an analogy to cooking a meal you've never cooked before. I like to look at a bunch of different cookbooks, a bunch of different recipes. And if this one says this is the right way to do it, and this one says this is the right way to do it, and they're both super precise, I know that my right answer can be anywhere in between those. So I think looking at a lot of numbers is a way to get away from the illusion of precision reading accuracy.
And Toby, I'll just echo what you said before, which is you want to have the right type of conversation. So you don't want to have a conversation where people are saying, well, why is it, 1007 versus 1008? That's not the right conversation, but saying, right, what are the things that have to prove true for any of these boxes to be the right one? Great, we can talk about our assumptions, we can test those assumptions, right? But let's not talk about 245 versus 246, because that's a conversation you don't want to have.
Yeah, when you look at the difference between the bottom left and the top right, there's a lot of room for discussion.
Yeah.
So we ended up building this platform. It is being tested right now in market with actual live customers. And the second one I want to talk about, I can be much more explicit about what we did and who it was for. We have a case study on it. So this was for the ADA. We started this project with a really strong hypothesis. So this was in the case of place a bet. And the bet we initially placed was there's room for an offering that it behaves a little bit like Airbnb, that manages surplus and demand in a two-sided marketplace. That senior dentists actually only work 3.5, 4 days a week. It's one of the perks of being an independent dentist. And they have an office that's idle. And people who just came out of dental school are looking to grow their own practice, but they can't afford to buy a whole space. Maybe they would go into a space a day a week here, a day a week there, and build their practice that way at a lower cost. Unless people ask it in the questions, I won't go into the reasons why, but neither party liked that idea. But we didn't come back with a straight no. We understood what people really wanted, and they did want that two-sided situation, but they didn't want it so much as a marketplace, but as a relationship broker. That the right value prop was there if we just extended the timeline, and it was about, I eventually want to sell my practice, and I can't do that unless I have an associate who's going to step into taking it over. I eventually want to own my own practice, but I need some mentorship because, again, it's sort of a lesson we learn about small businesses across a bunch of projects. The craft that people have is taking care of patients. The stuff that people have is running a business, and we can help them with the running a business part. So we looked at a lot of numbers. We looked at generationally who these categories were. We saw the largest generation in history and the second largest generation in history being active in wanting to sell or wanting to purchase a practice right now. We did some quantitative surveys on understanding the demand and for helping us define the product. What are their barriers? How can we help them solve these barriers? How can we help them not just practically solve them, but emotionally overcome some of the reasons why they wouldn't act? That they change is hard. Do I really want to do this? And then zeroed in on what was a pretty well-known market. Like, we knew how many dentists there are in North America. We knew how many of them are ADA members, how many of them are the only dentists in their zip code, which was a hypothesis we had targeted of value to both parties as well as to the ADA. As a nonprofit organization, as a member organization, they wanted to make sure that access to good dental care was maintained or improved. And if a dentist in their only zip code shuts down, that means access to care just got worse. So that was an important metric for us. And then we turned that into a cadence of so where are the transactions? What is the nature of the transactions? These blue dots here represent our model of what are the places that we get to charge for? And it's a two-sided market. So the established dentist pays at a certain point, the associate dentist pays at a certain point, and there was a nice diversified portfolio of revenue potential over time. One of the things that we ran into was the operational burden that the sales cycle for this was longer than we anticipated. So the cost to get this managed through the process was a little higher than we anticipated, but it's been rolled out nationwide. It rolled out ahead of schedule. So mindful of time, I've got a couple more slides that sort of step out of these project-specific views. I want to think about mapping to a maturity map. A lot of what's the right thing to do depends on where the organization is in terms of maturity and thinking across projects. The demonstrating ROI falls, I think, maybe into this commercialization gap space. Measure everything in that initial phase. The challenge in the second phase is one that's more focused on alignment, strategic alignment, and starting to build toward a portfolio. And then at the most mature level, you have a portfolio of portfolios, and you're really looking for measures of optimization, time to value, and moving things through, letting the learning that you derive from something that didn't work accelerate something else. And there's a couple of ways to think about that. For this strategic alignment thing, I want to throw a kind of an odd metaphor out at you. There are a lot of different strategies. There's no only one right way to get at that strategic alignment. There are a lot of different right answers for what a portfolio should look like, a product portfolio. And I think of it as compared to evolutionary strategies for reproduction. The goal of, according to Charles Darwin, everything's job is to simply get enough of my offspring to reproduce, and that's how I don't go extinct. And there's two very different strategies shown here. A tiger will have 1 or 2 cubs, not even every year, take care of, if both of them survive, both of them up to more than a year's time, and be super, super careful with seeing them through to adulthood. A frog will have thousands of offspring, but simply lay eggs and often abandon them. That's not the case always, but those are two viable strategies. And you probably have a tiger or a frog in your pocket right now, or on the desk sitting next to you, because Apple is a tiger and Samsung is a frog. Samsung would accuse Apple of being way, way too precious about rolling out a very, very small number of products, more tolerant of failure, including in-market failure. I'm going to put out a phone that folds. It doesn't fold. I'm going to put out a phone that maybe catches fire in a plane. But these are two models based on two different assumptions about the stability of the market, or other assumptions. In a really turbulent market, failure might be invisible. Like, you put it out there, 6 months later, nobody even remembers that you did that. It's the right strategy to behave like a frog. In a slow-moving market or in a risk-averse market, you might want to have fewer bets that you play with much more consideration. So hopefully you guys, hopefully that makes sense. It's a bit of an odd metaphor, but I think it helps me not over-index on, there's only one way to get a portfolio right. There's multiple ways to get a portfolio right. And when we talk about a portfolio, we have to talk about a bunch of different things. So I've come at this from a design perspective, but when we talk about innovation, we might be talking about a whole bunch of very, very different things. And coming at it from HCD is sort of pull from the market. Where is there an unmet or latent need? An R&D orientation is push into the market. And play is that third approach where we are investing in a bunch of startups and we're letting them do that high risk, froggy work of failing a lot. And I've seen a couple of examples of people doing more than one of these. We have one more poll question to ask you guys here about whether you do one of these really well and your challenge is you're only doing one of them. You do 2 or more, but they don't speak to each other at all, or they are coordinated. And while you do that poll, I'll say, I have seen a really interesting example of a client who had an investment area that observed the work of the human-centered design track. And we worked on a project, but they did this as a pattern where we had a thing that we were ready to launch into market. And they looked in their portfolio of startups and saw something that was close enough to having the capabilities and having built out the technology to be able to operate that business, and basically shaved 2 years off of the time to value by just basically strategically adjusting for better market fit, the work that their portfolio company was already doing.
I think we can end the poll and show the results.
That's pretty good. I mean, that multiple things are happening speaks well of the organization. I think the challenge then is about that portfolios coordination model. And I think I would imagine it's sort of, if you think about each of these as as a node in a triangle, what's the side represent in terms of if you're doing HCD and R&D together, what does that look like? I can see that probably applying really well in the pharma space. These may map differently to different industries. Do we want to open it up to questions? We've got 10 minutes left, and I just had one more slide, which was sort of a coda.
Yeah, Toby, why don't you hit that last slide, and then we'll dive in.
So the last thing I'll say is, and again, I'm thinking of speaking to folks inside of large organizations. You are not a startup. We hear a lot of C-suite language about behaving like a startup, and I think that can run into a whole lot of mindset and orientation challenges. That first three things list the ways that you don't get to play by their rules. You don't have their timelines, you don't have their budgets, you don't have their burdens of proof. Oftentimes a startup can win market share long before it has a revenue model. Inside of a large organization, that would never be possible. So quarter to quarter demonstration of a roadmap is something much more expected within a company. But the thing that I wanted to stress here is really the last three things, that startups lack some really interesting equity that you can capture and leverage if you are inside of a large organization. And leveraging brand equity, also overcoming some concern that testing things in the market might cause some brand harm. But an existing customer base, existing distribution channels, whatever it is, scale. There's a lot of things that can, if you can understand how ideas feed into the machine of an organization, they can scale much, much faster. And I think understanding the relationship between new ideas and the machine that a well-run organization is another way of getting at that organizational alignment, that I'm doing this for my CFO ultimately. And if I'm inside a company versus if I'm outside, the last question really is, what's your relationship with your funders and your investors? Are you answering their questions? Because if you are, you're building the business case while you're designing the product.
Toby, this is great. And we should just spend a minute on this slide, and then we'll hit a few other questions. And thanks so much. And for all of you, please continue to submit thoughts in the chat and in the questions. And if we don't get to them now, we'll certainly follow up. I mean, Toby, this is a great slide. Folks in the chat are saying it, but it could be a little bit of a bucket of cold water over heads, right? Because then you've got some things kind of crossed out in the upper right. There's been a lot of this belief that, well, hey, big companies should be able to do it. They've got all the benefits of the big company, and now we just have to figure out how to be a startup too, and we can launch our own startups. I mean, are there some stark implications here, which says, look, if we really just come down to it, big companies just can't launch startups remotely as good as startups can be built externally, and so they should stop trying? Would you go that far?
I think they would have to look honestly at what the implications of doing it are. Are you willing to tolerate that high of a failure rate? First of all, startups fail much higher, I think, than internal innovation fails. And I think that's because internal innovators tend to behave a little bit more like tigers, and startups behave a little bit more like frogs. Risk is distributed really broadly in the startup environment. The market is the brain. Organizations also have a brain that they can take advantage of and not let, randomness yield the occasional unicorn.
And a lot of organizations just wouldn't remotely have the patience to incubate, a unicorn and lose all the money associated for most of them.
Yeah.
This is great. Let's go through a few. So the whole B2B2C point, how explicit do you think leaders and teams should be early on about the fact that they do need to tell a very strong story internally to get the stakeholders on board? Should this be something brought up early on, and the team should be strategizing explicitly? Because most aren't.
I think so. And I think I sort of said loosely, where does this go? What does done look like? And I think that question about priority as sort of the fourth circle that maybe is bigger than all the others. Internal desirability, that should be kind of color all of the decisions. And if it's not clear where ideas go, solve for that before developing any ideas, because then otherwise you just have puppies.
Mm-hmm. A lot of, it's another question, a lot of innovation teams, rightly so, focus on desirability, really get excited about all the customer work, coming up with new ideas. But frequently you run into issues around viability from a business case standpoint, right? Hey, the customer may have the jobs to be done. The idea may be compelling to them. You may start figuring that out. But in the end, you hit a brick wall around the business case. How do you get early stage teams to start thinking about business design early enough?
In the way we think about quantum call working together in the earliest stages, I love the chance when we have a project where we are framed up well to do some business analysis, checking reports and understanding the shape and rate of change in a market before we do any research. If we can let business measures help inform who we talk to, who we even think is the target customer, we're never too far from being able to get back to a market understanding. It's the longer you wait before bringing that frame to the question, the harder it is, I think.
Fantastic. Another one around client experience, or maybe customer success functions within organizations. Quite often the desired metric is the clients or the customers are happy, but those are the folks who are on the front lines, perhaps, to understand what the customers and clients really want and what they could better value. So, how to help customer experience groups, customer success groups get beyond just checking the box to actually asking the questions that could reveal the necessary insights for innovation.
Yeah, I think that speaks to two opportunities that I think most companies are not taking advantage of. One is in gathering that intel, taking advantage of frontline employees as a source of really good intelligence, continuous intelligence on how are we doing. The other is how that translates into an intake process for product. In parallel, we're doing a lot of work at EPAM around like getting companies to move from a project mindset to a product mindset. And a product mindset includes a consistent and well understood rational intake process. How does customer insight flow back into that intake so that you're not dealing with emergencies? Client X needs a new version of this feature for their product exclusively. That's project mindset. Product mindset is how are we delivering value to clients in a way that can be scaled.
Maybe one or two more. Any just kind of quick thoughts about some of the maybe newest customer consumer research techniques you all are using? So a lot of talk over the years about doing ethnography, people do surveys, IDIs, at-home interviews, focus groups, all that stuff. Is anything you guys have been using more recently that you'd say sort of new tools that have emerged or techniques?
I think I would say that the more what we're doing is quant and qual together. So I like to think about research as happening in small, medium, and large sizes that you can talk to an N of 20 and learn why really, really deeply. You can survey an N of 100 and understand different questions, whether those folks are representative potentially of a broader market. And then you can use existing customer data from an existing product, especially if you're working within a product portfolio already and you're looking to move adjacent. What is the data telling you about people's behavior? So there's either market analysis or analytics are the large size, medium size is surveys, and small is that's that traditional ethnographic research. And rather than new methods in any of those spaces, it's how those work together better is I think where we're getting better.
Fantastic, thank you. We'll hit one more real quick because I know we're at the top of the hour. We got a question in. What are your suggestions to enable enterprise innovation in an environment run by needing clear ROI to get started? So any creative culture models of way of working? Yeah, folks really focused on ROI or knowing that that's an important thing to keep in mind from the beginning. Got to prove it.
I think somebody said in the chat saying, product launch is 2 years from now on this date. If you are comfortable with, if your client is comfortable with massive probability of inaccuracy, regardless of how precise it is, then you can do that. I think a lot of spreadsheet speculation about a new product is just that. we think it can do this with a 10% level of confidence. I think it's a really bad situation to be in. Proving ROI before you get started is really, really hard.
Yeah, maybe even having a conversation about it just to see how hard it is and inaccurate it is a good way. Listen, everybody, thank you. So Toby, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Thanks so much to everybody who's joined. And as we said, we will share the replay and the slides, and there were some questions we didn't get to, and we'll be sure to follow up. But again, Toby, thank you. This was great. A lot of thought-provoking things and a lot of things we can rant on in separate conversations, points of precision and the like.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Alex.